All right, so it's October finally, and I don't know about you, but I feel a bit of a chill in the air. So I figured what better time to talk about a book franchise that scared the crap out of us as kids. That's right. Today we're talking about Goosebumps. And if you grew up in the 90s and early 2000s and even liked reading books just a little bit, chances are you read a few of these bad boys, and there was a lot of them. You had plenty to choose from. We're talking literally dozens of them. Plus, you had the TV show, the toys, the games. We're going to talk about all of that today, so listeners, beware. You're in for a scare on Generation S.
What is it?
It's time to go back. Welcome.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Generation S. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and 2000s, and it is October, folks. I already mentioned it in the intro. It is October, my favorite time of the year, and, well, truth be told, we're actually recording this in August, but it's going to air in October, fingers crossed, and again, my favorite time of the year, and I am joined by my special guest today, brand new guest host on the podcast, Mr. Dan Vorbeck.
How's it going?
And this is actually, have a confession to make, this is actually take two.
So how's it going again?
So we, just the other day, we tried recording this episode, and we actually had a great time. We were about 40 minutes in, and then I looked down at my computer and realized I had not hit record. So I had to interrupt a fantastic story about a movie review, and I felt terrible. So anyway, today we're talking about Goosebumps, folks. One of my favorite book franchises of all time, definitely top 3 for my childhood. It's a book series that kind of got me into, horror movies and, higher level horror novels like Stephen King and that type of thing. And so we're going to talk all about that today, the book series, the TV show, the merchandise, the movies, all that fun stuff. But let's kind of start things out, man, with our earliest memories of Goosebumps. Dan, for you, how did you first get exposed to it?
It's the Scholastic Book Fair.
Okay.
The one that comes around your school, and you can buy books and erasers and those cool folders with the different artwork and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, man. See, I never bought books from there. I always bought the merchandise. I bought the erasers and the pencils and the stuff that looked cool because I'm like, no, I can get books for free at the library, man. I'm not going to pay for books.
Well, we had a library. I went to one of those preppy Catholic schools. We had a library in the school.
Yep.
So, Scholastic Book Tour came around, and they didn't have the stuff we had in our library, so I'd go and maybe pick up a book or two.
All right, this is going to sound totally ignorant, but in a Catholic school library, was there anything besides Bibles you could read?
Sure, yeah. There was like the classics. There was a lot of Shakespeare, and
okay.
There was the encyclopedias, of course, because there was no Google back then.
Right.
Everything was Encyclopedia Britannica, and it was just a lot of it was school books,
Okay. So you weren't going to get the fun books that the Scholastic Book Fair would bring around.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you get all those cool covers like on Goosebumps, and you're like,
yeah,
interesting.
Nice. Well, there you go. Okay. So you first saw them there. Do you happen to remember what your first Goosebumps book was?
Yeah, it was the Haunted Mask.
The Haunted Mask.
Which is, I think, a lot of people's favorite. It's probably one of the most recognizable covers out there.
I think definitely top 5. Like if you think of Goosebumps characters or Goosebumps, stories, I mean, it's got to be up there as the most iconic imagery. I think that you've got Night of the Living Dummy, Slappy. That's the name of the dummy in those books. What else? What are some other iconic? I'm trying to think of other images or other characters that stick out as you see that and you go, oh, that's Goosebumps.
Nightmare House, that classic. It's like a classic haunted house. I think it's what every image of a haunted house has ever been based off of.
Oh, okay. From was that Welcome to Dead House,
yeah,
right?
Welcome to Dead House. That was
the first book, if I recall correctly.
The first one.
So, yeah, man. I mean, and that's what's cool, too. We're going to talk about the books in more detail, but again, we're talking about kind of how we got started. So for me, I was probably in 3rd grade, and we actually had them. We did have a school library. So we had a library in our school, but it, no offense, it had normal people books. It was great. It had stuff that kids in 3rd grade really loved reading. So they were actually, it's funny because in our school, it was the kids in my class would compete between Goosebumps books and do you remember I Spy books?
Oh, yeah. definitely.
Those were, I mean, we're talking hot commodities. So either that or now there was more Goosebumps books to choose from. So more often than not, kids, the I Spy books went first, and then there's plenty of Goosebumps books to choose. And honestly, what got me started, I think, was the cover art from the books.
That's what draws you in, and that's what's so genius about them.
They're so well made and iconic, and I'm telling you, I could probably look at least from like the original books. You wrote it in your notes here. I think there's like over 60 original stories. 62. And so you could probably show me an image from most of those. I'd say if you gave me a quiz and it was all book covers without titles from Goosebumps, and it was a 10-question quiz, I probably would confidently get 8 or 9 out of 10. Hands down.
Yeah, I think that's true for most of us, and I think we don't realize it. Like at this point, you'd be like, oh, Goosebumps, I remember those. But then you start going through it, and you're like, oh, no, wait, I really remember these.
You really remember them. And and there's things that start, and that's kind of what this podcast is about, is kind of opening up those memories from things you may have forgotten or things that you didn't realize other people remember too, and then it just kind of helps you remember it even more. But yeah, man, those book covers, and then I remember that every book cover had like a little phrase on the front that was like a pun or something that was related to the story that was like, ooh, this is creepy. Like, I remember it was for Night of the Living Dummy, the tagline on the cover said, "Look who's stalking." And so I'm like, oh, this is creepy.
I mean, R.L. Stine was just so good. And, a lot of the twists in a lot of his stories and stuff like that were just so well timed and so well written, and just for such a short book, you got a lot out of it. It was kind of a journey for even a short book.
I mean, it really was. And if you think about it, when we were reading these, because I was probably 8 or 9, and I think you said you were the same age, right? It was like,
like a year or two older, but about the same age when I started.
Around the same age. And so, I mean, those books were anywhere probably from 100 to 130 pages, on average. I mean, that's not a short book for a kid that age. You think about it. I mean, as an adult, could we breeze through those? Absolutely. But for a kid, I mean, that's a novel. It gives you a sense of accomplishment. I think you said this the last time we tried recording, is it gives you that sense of accomplishment that you finished a book that wasn't a picture book.
And for me personally, I had dyslexia. Well, I still have dyslexia, but
I don't think it goes away, Dan.
No, it doesn't go away. You can't cure it. But these books got me into reading as like recreational.
Yeah.
Before I only read if I had to. But these books, it was recreational, and like you said, you could go through 1 or 2 a week, or a couple a week, and really feel like you're accomplishing something. So it made me feel good as someone who probably didn't read as fast as some of the other kids.
Yeah. Because like you said, you can kind of breeze. I remember one time I did read like 2 in a day, and it was, I remember it specifically because I was so excited that I went up to tell my mom. And now that I'm thinking about it, the last time we tried recording this, I couldn't remember what the books were. I remember what they were now. It was My Hairiest Adventure.
Oh, do you remember that one? Yep, the hair kept growing back on the kid. Yep.
It was like a werewolf almost, right? Or was it? And
it was almost a werewolf.
Yeah, and then it was The Boy Who Turned Invisible, or
The Invisible Boy. Yeah.
Was it The Invisible Boy?
The Invisible Boy.
So I remember I read those 2 in the same day, and I remember I went upstairs to talk to my mom. She was sitting upstairs in her bedroom, and she was sewing something, because she was always sewing something. And so I was like, Mom, I read 2 books in a day. And she's like, that's great, hon. And she was on the phone with somebody. So she's like, that was basically it. Anyway, it was a bigger deal for me than apparently it was for my mom, but that's okay, because to this day, I will brag about the fact that I read 2 Goosebumps books in a single day.
You read 2 books in a day. As a kid, that's an accomplishment, and
that's
every
a huge accomplishment.
Because
that was the era too of the famed, I don't know if you had these at your school, but the Pizza Hut pizza party, the Book It. You remember Book It?
Yep.
You had Book It?
Well,
okay.
No, I know what you're talking about, but we had something different. I think it was like the monthly book.
Okay.
I forget what the exact thing called it, but it was a book competition. Whoever read the most amount of books could win a pizza party for the class or something like that, or whatever class read the most.
So because we had multiple, grades, classes for our grade. And so we would compete against the other classes, and we had one. So this is, you're not going to know this because this was an upstate New York thing, but we had something called Reading with the Red Wings. So we had a minor league hockey team called the Adirondack Red Wings. Yep. And as you can guess, it was the minor league team for the Detroit Red Wings. And so we had a competition where if we won, then we would get a pizza party and get to hang out with the Adirondack Red Wings. Now, we did not win.
That's awesome.
We didn't win, unfortunately. It was really cool. We didn't win. Or no, they didn't hang out with us. They got us tickets to the game. And actually, we did win one of those because I remember going to the game. But yeah, and then we had the Pizza Hut. Remember tangent. Do you remember the little personal pan pizzas?
Yes.
Do they still make those?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I haven't had Pizza Hut in forever, though.
I mean, it's funny. There's one next door to my house. If I've had Pizza Hut in the last 15 years once, that's a lot because and it's funny because I don't hate Pizza Hut, but there's better pizza out there.
You live in New York, there's better pizza.
Well, you live in New York. I live in Georgia. Pizza's still hard to come by.
We used to live in New York. We used to live in New York,
and you definitely could get better pizza elsewhere. But even down here, man, there's better pizza. And to be honest with you, if I'm going to go into that debate of fast food pizza between like Pizza Hut, Domino's, and Papa John's, I'm still probably going to put Pizza Hut at the bottom.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway, I digress. So we're talking about how we kind of got into the books there. So let's kind of go through them, man, because there's a few different categories we can talk about here as far as like we talked about the first book you read was The Haunted Mask, and honestly, I think that was mine too. Now that I think back of it, I think The Haunted Mask was the first one because I remember that cover so vividly, right. And then I couldn't put the book down because it was just so good. But in your opinion, I mean, is that the best book for you too? Is the first one, or were there other books that really stood out for you?
No, I don't think. I mean, it was definitely one of the best. I would say it's probably my top three. But
top three, okay.
Definitely, Night of the Living Dummy was. Yep. I don't think it was then my favorite, but now it's one of my favorites.
Now, why is that, Dan? Tell me about why you don't like Night of the Living Dummy.
I didn't like dolls.
Okay, that's fair.
Because my babysitter let me watch Chucky or Child's Play when I was I don't know 5, and she's
I think that's when my babysitter let me watch it too.
Doll, and no, it wasn't. It was terrifying. So, and then maybe in a later episode I'll tell a story about a doll that I owned, but I didn't really like dolls, but so that book was good, but it terrified me.
Yeah,
and then I think the Abominable Snowman one.
Oh, the Abominable Snowman from Pasadena.
I think that was probably one of my other top ones that I really, really, really remember the most out of. Those three is probably the ones I remember the most.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. So I'm trying to think. So I remember the last time we tried recording, I did have a favorite. It was The Beast from the East, and that's still a great one. But since then, my brain has opened up other books that, in my opinion, are probably just as good. It's funny because I can associate the books that I read with a time period in my life, and honestly, like where I was when I read them, which is really weird. Like I remember Beast from the East, I read to and from. I had this after school enrichment program that I was enrolled in, where like I would go and do like chess club after school, and it was cool. But it was like a 20-minute drive to this other place that we went to, and so I would read books on the way. And so I remember reading. Why that's what I'm saying. I read. I would get the books from the library. I would read them to and from the place. And Beast from the East was one of them. But there's another one that just stood out. And again, it may be because it was one of the earlier TV episodes that I saw. But do you remember Piano Lessons Can Be Murder? We didn't talk about that one last time.
No,
you remember
we didn't
that
talk
one?
about that last time. No,
so
that's
the one where the kid gets piano lessons from this creepy old guy who like loves his hands. Like it thinks he's got the greatest hands to play the piano, and the kid's just like, dude, you're creepy, back up. And long story short, the kid ends up at this recital hall, I think. Again, I didn't do research on this, and I'm just thinking of this back, top of my head. He ends up in some kind of recital hall and sees these pianos being played just by hands. And
yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes,
so you just see hands playing the pianos, and it turns out that his teacher, the creepy old guy, is actually a robot.
Yep.
So that was awesome.
Yeah, no, that was a weird one. That had a cool twist too.
That was one of the few that I actually owned. Like I didn't own a lot of them because I would get them from the library. Right. That was one of the few that either I had or I think my brother might have had it. Honestly, like a grandparent or something bought us Goosebumps books, and I think I got The Haunted Mask. I think that's how I probably got into starting to read it. Was I'd seen them at the library, or maybe I even got the book first, and then I went to the library and saw that there was so many more to read that I was just like, yes, this is the best. So all right, so your best book probably Haunted Mask, Night of the Living Dummy. So for me. Again, I mean, Piano Lessons Can Be Murder, Night of the Living Dummy, The Haunted Mask. We're probably in the same boat there in general. Now, this is where it's going to differentiate, though, I think, because, you've got the best, you've got your first that you read, but let's talk about truly the scariest. And you may have already mentioned it because I know you don't have a thing for dolls. And so was it Night of the Living Dummy that was the scariest for you?
That and Camp Nightmare.
Yes.
That
so
one,
what was? It was a great one. What was for you? Because I mean, that was the one where the kid is at a summer camp and his friends just keep getting bumped off in the middle of the night, basically, and disappearing. So is that just the part that scared you? What was it that
I went to summer camp.
Okay, so, see, I never went to summer camp as a kid, so I couldn't relate.
So
to that.
I went to summer camp. I mean, mine was just a day camp, but at the same time, you traveled in this pack, and then every once in a while, some kid would wander off, and they'd be gone.
So that's legit, man. I mean that's a legitimate fear.
They'd show up like a half hour, an hour later, and some other troop, had them or something like that. But, you started reading that and you're like, oh, wait, this could happen if we ever go to the woods. Like, I don't know. It was like real world for me, I
mean, I think that's a legitimate fear. And honestly, yeah, when you mention it like that, like, no, because I do remember, like, I didn't go to like a day camp or a summer camp, but I mean, we had a family camp set up in the woods, not like a cabin, but it was like a house, but it was nothing special, but it was in the woods. And so we would go walking, and at nights, it was around the same time that I had started hearing about Friday the 13th and Jason and all that stuff. And I knew that was in the woods too. And so that all combined together, and like the fear of getting lost in the woods. No, I think that's a legitimate fear for kids.
Absolutely.
And I mean, adults too. Let's not kid ourselves here. If I got lost in the woods now, I'd be pissing myself.
Yeah, you imagine now too. I mean, you can get scared as an adult if you leave the house without your keys, your wallet, and your cell phone.
Oh, it doesn't take much.
You walk down a block and lose sight of your house. You'll have a full-blown panic attack.
Oh, yeah. We can't do anything now without technology basically telling us how to exist.
Exactly.
And, and I say that like I'm like an old curmudgeon, and I'm only 34.
And we're recording a podcast.
Yeah, and we're recording a podcast, right? Yeah, we're so, this technology, man, it's ridiculous.
Crazy.
Hold on, let me adjust my microphone levels on my digital computer output. Anyway, all right. So for me, scariest book for me, I think hands down is it's the second one they ever wrote. It was called Stay Out of the Basement.
Yeah, you said that last time, and
I did.
It's a good reason. It's a good reason,
and it rings true. And I'm going to tell that story again. So, Stay Out of the Basement is about these two kids and their dad, who is a scientist, and he is always working. They never see him. He's always working in his basement. Actually, I think he may go to work too, but for the most part, he spends a lot of his time in his basement with doing his experiments that the kids aren't allowed to see. Right? They'd never go down there. Dad's working. Stay away from Dad.
And if they get close to the basement, he yells at him.
Well, he freaks out on him. He loses he goes crazy. He loses it, and so, these kids are like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden their dad starts acting really weird, and they're like, what is going on? So they end up sneaking down in the basement, and spoiler alert for a 30-year-old book series, they end up finding their dad like stuffed in a cooler or a closet. Not a cooler. That's morbid. I think it was a closet, maybe.
I think it was a closet.
But they realized that their dad that they had been interacting with for the last few days or weeks or whatever was like a clone that their dad had made out of plant matter. And so, and why is that scary, you may ask? Well, I'm going to tell you. So my dad was not a scientist. He was a corrections officer, but he worked a lot. He, was a single income family. So he was working long hours, and, it was 4 kids for part of the time, at least 3 kids, my 2 younger brothers, my older sister lived with us for part of the time. And, it was just him. He was bringing home the bacon. And so he worked a lot. I never saw him. And when he was home, a lot of times it would be your dad sleeping. Don't bother your dad. He was, because he would work for, 24 hours straight, come home and try to sleep for a few hours and then go back out and work a double shift. So yeah, you can understand why you don't want 3 kids who can't stop fighting with each other, screaming around the house. I understood why it was the way it was. Right. But it did, again, it made me feel like, oh man, I miss my dad. I didn't get to see my dad that much. And I'm not saying this to say like, oh, I have a terrible relationship with my father, because my dad and I are great. I mean, we're awesome now. He's retired. It's great. I call him whenever I want to. We're always chatting. So it's all good. But man, back then, like that to me was like, I had a healthy fear of my dad when he was mad. Right. And so to read a book about kids that like their dad would get mad at them, I'm like, ooh, I feel you, bro. That was kind of my mentality with that. But but anyway, so I'd say that was the scariest.
I think it's always those books that hit like close to home.
Well, and it doesn't matter what it is. There could be something from any, and not just Goosebumps, any book that you read. Yeah. And something in there just clicks with you. And I think that's truly the mark of a good writer. You know what I mean? Or a good storyteller, I guess, is that something they wrote at some point resonated with you so much, and you're like this. You feel like it's speaking to you.
Yeah.
And so what was really cool too is a lot of these characters in the Goosebumps books, they were a little bit older than us, right? So I think they were typically around 12. That was like the sweet spot for the age of these kids.
The preteen group.
The preteen, you know. And so I was a couple years younger. So to me, I was reading about big kids going through scary stuff, but being brave about it. And so, you know, that was kind of cool too. But it resonated. You know, not that I could directly relate to the characters all the time, but because it was like I never had a big brother or I had a big sister, so I take it back. But I never had like a big brother growing up. And so seeing some of these characters that were big brothers that were older than me was really kind of cool to read about. And the things that they got to experience in those stories. So anyway, so that's kind of the core Goosebumps books. Again, there were 62. I mean, he's written more. R.L. Stine has written, I mean, he's probably, well, I don't know about thousands, but hundreds. Couple hundred books in total, and there were spin-offs, and actually one of my favorite spin-offs came out pretty soon after the original series. It was the Give Yourself Goosebumps books.
And the Choose Your Own Adventure ones.
Well, exactly, yeah. So for those uninitiated, a Choose Your Own Adventure book is when you look at a page, and at the bottom of the page, why are you laughing?
I just, you know, it's funny to me that we have to explain it, but I get why we have to explain it.
Not everyone has read a Choose Your Own Adventure book.
No, I get it. No, it's funny, though.
So you're reading a story, and, you know, you get to a pivotal point in the plot, and it says, let's say there's a guy named Seth, and Seth is in a dark haunted house, and he can either choose to go upstairs or he can go down in the basement, but he's got to go to one or the other. For some reason, he has to go one or the other. And it says on the bottom, if you want Seth to go upstairs, turn to page 63. If you want Seth to go downstairs, turn to page 75. And you're like, oh my God, okay, this is a big decision. Let's do this. And so you make your decision, and you'll either continue the story or
die.
You die. That's basically how at least how the Goosebumps books ended.
Usually the 50-50 chance.
Yeah, and so it was cool because to me that was like fascinating. It was almost like a video game, but not, because it was a book. But you could decide, you know, and then you could go back and reread them. And I think that was the idea, that, you know, they wanted to sell a book where kids would reread them over and over again and not have the same story every time, right?
It was like the first time where you could, you know, like you said, a video game where you can unlock different endings.
Well, and the thing is, you're right. Yeah, like the different endings. And then, you know, I remember even the cover art was still very well illustrated, but it was unique because it had like that kind of that holographic sheen to it, right? Yep. Where you could like, you know, depending on how you looked at it in the light, it was like different colors, and it would do the weird reflection patterns and things
anybody
like that.
Who collects cards, you know, you'll know the holographic ones
well,
are.
Like, yeah, if you've collected Pokemon cards, and believe me, we'll do a Pokemon episode, but if you collected Pokemon cards and you had one of those holographic cards, it was that same effect. Yep. On those Goosebumps books, and so those were cool, man. There was there was the Carnival of Horrors.
There's you
mentioned you mentioned another one that was like almost identical. It was like Horrorland, Welcome to Horrorland, but I can remember the cover,
something like that.
I remember the cover though was like a giant green monster with horns, and it was a mouth, and you walked through his mouth. I think that was like the cover.
Yes.
And then the Carnival of Horrors was like basically a crocodile getting out of his cage.
And another one, you know, as we did this last time, my brain unlocked too. And one I remember vividly was Little Comic Shop of Horrors.
Yes. Oh, that was good.
I love that one because you know I always went to comic book stores, so that was a good one.
Oh my God, there's so many. So, okay, we didn't do this last time, but I want to do this real quick. So, you know, and we'll wrap up with the books here and move on to the show in a second. But with the books, give me your top 5 favorite book cover. We're going to go back to covers. Your top 5 favorite book covers. Yeah, it doesn't have to be in any order. Just like the top 5. They're like, those were awesome.
The Haunted Mask was definitely up there.
Okay.
I would say Nightmare House. Welcome to Nightmare House. Definitely a classic. One. Night of the Living Mummy was a great cover.
Yep. It just had the mummy with the glowing red eyes.
Yep. It was just so simple, but like really, really well done.
Yep.
I think the one with the werewolf. The werewolf
of Fever Swamp. Yep.
I remember that had like a really creepy. I think it was just like the teeth and the eyes were coming like out.
Well, no. So the Werewolf of Fever Swamp was an actual. You saw a wolf howling with a moon behind him.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to. I'm still trying to think of the one. Well, that's a great one. Yeah, no, that one's really good. It's funny you mentioned that. So I want you to save your last two because I want to go on a side tangent here. Because again, that's what we do.
Sure.
We talked about this last time, and I want to make sure we mention it this time. So the you mentioned Return of the Mummy, or not Return of the Mummy, the Curse of the Living Mummy.
Yep,
was the first one. So the Return of the Mummy was the second one. And then it just got me thinking. We didn't talk about the system the last time we recorded. We talked about how what was cool about Goosebumps is you had a lot of basically standalone stories, but there were a few that were essentially miniature franchises within the Goosebumps, literary universe, or we'll call it glue, right?
The Goosebumps multiverse.
The Goosebumps multiverse. So you had like Night of the Living Dummy 1, Night of the Living Dummy 2, 3, and then you had a spinoff called Bride of the Living Dummy.
Yep.
You had which, by the way, I just realized that's probably a play on Bride of Chucky, which came out in 1997.
Or Bride of Frankenstein.
Or Bride of Frankenstein. Either way. But the fact that it's a doll and he gets a wife. Anyway, so you also had, Curse of the Living Mummy, Return of the Mummy. You had Monster Blood 1, 2, and 3, and I think Monster Blood 4 ended up being a thing, but I never read it. So there was a few that were like, they had sequels, and I think those are the ones that were sequels were the ones that probably had those iconic recurring characters that when they would advertise Goosebumps products, it was those faces that they would use. But anyway, I had to bring that up because I thought that was worth noting. I don't think there's really ever been a book series that vast that has had, in addition to standalone stories, just recurring stories and recurring characters.
No, I don't think so. But, I'm going to mention one author, and this isn't about Goosebumps or anything like that. His name is Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
If you ever look him up, he writes amazing books. And he's got a couple of different series out, and he always has one character that kind of is in all of them and knows about all the other universes. It's kind of like the Watcher, almost, if you're into Marvel.
Oh, from Marvel.
Who the Watcher is, yeah.
You know what it reminds me of too is the Dark Tower series from Stephen King.
Yes, that too.
With the gunslinger. Yeah.
So, very similar.
But no, man. I mean, and again, more props to R.L. Stine for creating a world that is so full of character, and it's so well written. And again, not every book takes place in the same universe as each other. And honestly, I almost feel like that multiverse concept is kind of a recent thing as far as talking about it so much.
Yes.
I think in comics it's been around for a while,
Forever.
But like as far as like the mainstream, it wasn't since Marvel that we started talking about the Marvel cinematic universe or whatever, and now the multiverse with everything going on with that. But anyway, no, it was just really cool because you would have these franchises spin out of Goosebumps that became very popular and in their own right, to the point where he kept writing sequels with the same characters that they love so much. So anyway, I'm so sorry I interrupted you. You had two left, your last two as far as your top Goosebumps books.
So you're talking about cover art. A Night in Terror Tower.
Yep, with the executioner guy in the front.
Executioner guy in the front, and it came from beneath.
Came from beneath the sink.
There you go.
With the sponge.
Yes.
Oh, that was great. That was a good one.
That was good.
Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so let me see. My 5 favorite. I mean, we've already talked about the Haunted Mask, so I'm not going to include it in the list, but it's certainly, it's up there. It's iconic. I'd say probably Monster Blood 2.
Okay.
So you had Monster Blood 1 where the cover art was just green goo all over the stairs, which is fine. It was very Blob inspired, like the movie The Blob. But Monster Blood 2 was basically you had a hamster that had drank monster blood and ended up just like exploding out of the cage. And it was creepy because rodents creep me out in general. And so when they get to be huge and you've got those big rodent teeth just sticking out in your face.
Rodents are worse.
Mutant rodents, man. They're the worst.
So you don't like Splinter?
Well, we're not even going to go there because Splinter is really
episode, right?
it's a tragedy. Well, it was an episode. Let's see if I count backwards.
That's right.
It was episode 4 on Generation S. Thank you very much. But anyway, so Monster Blood 2. We probably got to go with Piano Lessons Can Be Murder because it was the handless, playing the piano, and so I again can vividly see it. The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, and Do you remember that one?
Yeah, actually. Oh, yeah. It just had the pumpkin head guy and like the wind's blowing and.
Well, so he's sitting there in the cornfield, yeah, and so it's a kid. I think he goes to stay with his grandparents, maybe, and on their farm. And this, the scarecrow at night just goes around, and it's just, it's a classic monster story.
Yeah.
I remember that one specifically. The cover was fantastic, but also because, and this is really where I'm probably going to lose half of my listeners on this episode, but so the spines of the Goosebumps books had the word Goosebumps written on there, right? The first 19 Goosebumps books were written in all caps in a kind of a boring looking font. It just said Goosebumps, right?
I remember that.
And then The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight was the first story to have the Goosebumps logo font on the spine of the book.
Nice.
I don't know why.
The one with the spooky lettering and stuff like that?
Yeah, kind of that blood drip. And again, we didn't even talk about that, but talk about a logo, man, that stands out. You're like, oh, that's creepy.
It is creepy.
And it was, so that one was the first one to use that font on the side of the book. And again, really doesn't matter in the long run. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And since then, I would always kind of equate the first 20 as like kind of the OG. Now, obviously, the first 60 were written probably in the span of a few years, so they're all pretty much bunched together. Right. But those first 20 with the original font on the spines, I thought, okay, these are like the classic, the pinnacle of storytelling. And, he ended up writing some great ones after that, so that became pretty irrelevant pretty quickly.
But anyway, those first 20 are the staples, the
absolutely
ones that everybody pretty much read.
Yes, no, 100%. So, okay, so we talked about Monster Blood 2. We talked about Piano Lessons Can Be Murder. Another iconic one. What was the one I just mentioned? It was
the Scarecrow one.
The Scarecrow. Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. Thank you. Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. Let's see. We got two more here. So
you're getting honestly, old when both of us forget about something we talked about 3 minutes ago.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh man. All right. So I got to go with Werewolf of Fever Swamp. You said it as well.
I think
cover. It's fantastic cover art. And then let's see. My last one. We're probably going to go with. I got to say probably Beast from the East. I know I already mentioned it earlier, but it's a cool one where you got a blue Tasmanian devil-looking guy hanging off a purple tree, and you're like, what is going on?
You're like, I have to read this. I got to know what's going on.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, like, this is so... Because it wasn't like a classic horror vibe, because that was what I liked about those books, too, is that it wasn't always just straight horror, right? You had plenty of those. You had a lot of horror tropes, but you also had ones that really weren't that scary, but they were fun. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There was one about a boy who it was called, How I Learned to Fly. It was about a boy who learned to fly, and he didn't want to learn to fly anymore, and he just basically ended up being cursed to be able to fly. And I can't imagine that sucking that bad, but apparently he didn't like doing it. And so, I think he didn't like the attention. So he learned to fly, and then like everyone thought he was a superhero, and he just wanted to be left alone. And so that was the scary, but it wasn't scary though. You know what I mean? And then you've got some that were like. It's not even remotely horror. Like it was called Goosebumps, but I could zero scare factor for me at least.
Right.
Can you think of any for you that were like cool and good books, but not scary?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I gotta take a second to think about that. Oh, you know what? The Cuckoo Clock of Doom.
Okay.
So
that one's kind of scary too, though. You don't think?
My grandfather was an avid cuckoo clock collector.
Okay.
His basement was covered in multiple beautiful, beautiful clocks. All handmade. He kept them all perfectly in sync. But when you stayed over his house at midnight, every cuckoo clock would go off at the same time.
Oh, that's scary.
So, I was scared at first. But after a while, I got used to it. So then when I read the Cuckoo Clock book, I'm just like, oh, it's just a cuckoo clock, whatever. There's nothing scary about that.
Also, by the way, one of my favorite episodes, which we're going to get to in a second, is the Cuckoo Clock of Doom.
Yes.
It's a fantastic episode from Goosebumps. So anyway, that's the books, guys. Let's go ahead and segue. That was a perfect segue that I just ruined with too many words afterwards.
You did, but it's okay.
All right, man. Let's talk about the TV show, because that was huge too, right? I mean, you had the books, and then honestly, I think the TV show, at least for the time, was on par in terms of popularity, because it was. I mean, every episode was based off of a book, right. One of the books in the series. And it lasted for probably 2 or 3 seasons. And these were seasons back then. It was 4 seasons.
4 seasons, you know, and like you were about to say, the seasons were like 20 episodes long.
Yeah, these were like legit, like OG TV seasons where there was like 20 to 25 episodes a season.
And no 6-month hiatus to
no,
well,
exactly.
The
there was no mid-season finale back then, you know, and so it was these stories that were, for the most part, put to screen quite well. I mean, there was definitely a few times where I watched it going, okay, that's not how I pictured that story happening in my head. Like Night of the Living Dummy, for example. The dummy. You think of Slappy the dummy from Goosebumps. Even if you hardly remember anything about Goosebumps, you can probably picture him in your head.
You're probably doing it right now as you listen to this.
I am. I'm literally looking at the cover. We're on camera. You're seeing me. Look, I'm looking at the cover. It's up there in front of me. So, but you watched the Night of the Living Dummy 2. By the way, they didn't make an episode for Night of the Living Dummy 1. They started with 2. Don't know why.
And then they did 3,
And then they did 3. So, I mean, what's the point? Why not? They should have made the first one. But anyway, so the dummy they used in that episode literally looks nothing like Slappy the dummy. No. It looks like a Muppet mixed with like that project you failed in ceramics class.
It looks like, and I'm going to blank on his name, the guy from Happy Days, who's a director now.
Ron Howard?
Ron Howard. It looks like if you made a puppet of Ron Howard,
you know,
and made him evil, that was it.
It would be hilarious if it turns out that was like the behind the scenes inspiration, is we wanted Ron Howard to watch this and just realize we were making fun of him.
I mean, you can go to Netflix right now and be like, I don't think so, but you'll look up that episode and be like, it kind of looks like Ron Howard.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So anyway, so the TV show, every episode was a story from the Goosebumps series. Some were better than others. Some were amazing. We talked about The Haunted Mask being the first book that we read. It wasn't the first in the series, by the way. It was one of the OG, one of the original font spines on the covers. Right. But it was the first TV special, and it was a primetime special. They heavily advertised it. I remember I bought it on VHS. That's how I first saw it.
I got it from Blockbuster when it came out.
Yes, it was its own, and it was in one of those big fat covers too, like the old Disney tapes used to be, the white ones.
Because it had 2. It had 2 tapes in it.
No, mine didn't have 2 tapes.
Well,
it was
the
just
one from Blockbuster had 2.
Oh, okay.
It was because each part had its own VHS tape.
That's right, because when it came out on TV, it was a 2-parter.
Right.
And so, and they just made like an hour out of it. Whereas the one on the VHS tape that we owned was 1 tape, but it had like a special intro with R.L. Stine in the beginning.
Viewers beware, you're in for a scare.
It was exactly. Instead of, because the book series was readers beware, you're in for a scare. Yep. They kind of switched it to viewers there. By the way, so I have to say this. So before we saw The Haunted Mask on TV, you had seen pictures of R.L. Stine, because he would sometimes be on the back of the books, right? They would show like about the author.
He's super creepy.
Well, he kind of looks like a modern day Edgar Allan Poe, right? So you expect this guy to just have this sinister vibe to him. And then when he intros The Haunted Mask, right, on VHS, and he's just like, hello, I'm R.L. Stine. I write the Goosebumps books. And I was like, this is so disappointing. I also have a lot of
candy in my van.
No, that would even be creepy. He just came across as like Phil from IT that is here to fix your copier. Like,
and also scare all of your children.
I mean, who knew, right? That's the thing, is like, he's so unassuming when he talks, and you're like, this guy he belted out novel after novel, man. He was a freaking machine. But anyway, so I have to share that story because I was so surprised with how dorky he sounded.
Tangents, do you know what he got inspired to write Goosebumps about? How he got inspired?
No.
He read the comic book Tales from the Crypt.
Get out of here.
So he read those comic books, and that inspired him into the horror genre, which, sparked him to write Fear Street, which is, another Netflix show, which is really, really good if you're into horror. He wrote those as well, and then eventually he got hassled to write like a kid's, like a children's horror line, and that's where Goosebumps got started. But he was always inspired as a kid by Tales from the Crypt.
I didn't know that.
Was another great horror show when we were kids with the Crypt Keeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what I was going to say is, do you think that, like, you got to think about that too, because Tales from the Crypt was like an 80s show, right? Yeah. That came out in the 80s. Like, you have all these other horror anthology series, like, you look at modern shows like American Horror Story or whatever. Those are, and they're good. But you look back at like Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark or Eerie, Indiana, and you almost wonder, like, does the like, did they all? I mean, I'm sure they had to have taken inspiration from Tales from the Crypt.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was such a big comic book series back in the day, and then the TV show was very, very popular too. I remember watching it when I was younger on Sci-Fi, right after I watched. Oh God, I'm going to forget the name of the show. Oh, Hercules and Xena. I used to watch those, and then later at night it was Tales of the Crypt.
Okay, so you had Hercules. I remember that show. You had Xena Warrior Princess,
right.
And then you had Tales from the Crypt. Now, I remember Tales from the Crypt being like an HBO show, and we didn't have HBO, so like I knew about it, but I never could watch it.
They also showed it on Sci-Fi at like 11 o'clock, after all the kids are in bed.
Yeah, and I was one of those kids. We went to bed pretty early as kids,
but every once in a while, I'd catch it.
Absolutely, or like I was definitely guilty of sneaking down and watching shows late at night. Usually, it was for other reasons, but sometimes it was to be scared. Sure, we'll go with that. But anyway, so back to the TV show. Fantastic. I mean, we talked about this the last time we tried recording, but the intro to the show, such iconic imagery and music. And I'm not going to play the intro song here because I don't want to get sued.
Right.
But it was the right.
Yep.
And so good. And then you had like the
and that was basically the entire song too.
I mean, it was. So
it
basically
just played over and over again, but it was great.
Well, it was. And what was great is, so the beginning, the intro to the show, you had this creepy guy in a black trench coat and a briefcase that is apparently the worst briefcase ever manufactured because it just falls open, right? I mean, that's not what they're supposed to do. No. And all of these pages go out, and you can only assume it's R.L. Stine, and he's written all these books, and the pages just go flying in the wind. And all of a sudden, you see, and I can't remember if it's the entire logo or just the letter G, but a shadow starts looming over normal things and making them like creepy, haunted. Like, remember that dog, right? Where the dog's eyes started glowing.
Yep.
I mean, that is, I think I actually saw that picture on Facebook the other day. That's how iconic it is. People remember it to this day, 30 years later almost. And so,
nostalgia, baby.
That's what it is, man. We're 30 years past the time we grew up. We've got disposable income, and that's how society works.
Exactly.
You look back at I've talked about this theory before, but the 2010s were all about the 80s, right?
Right.
You had Stranger Things, you had all of this 80s iconography coming back into stores, you had band shirts that were coming out, hairstyles, you got the straight-legged jeans were really coming back into style at that point. That was all it's 30 years later, right? Yep. So 30 years later,
I'm waiting for JNCOs to come back,
But dude, JNCOs are back.
Are they? No,
I'm not even kidding you.
Really?
JNCOs, I don't think they ever left, if I'm being honest with you. I think the subculture just got smaller and smaller, because you can Google like JNCO 2022 and you will see people wearing them that look, I mean, you wouldn't know it wasn't 1999 if you didn't see a different hairstyle or something like that, because that's, anyway, so I don't want to go off on too much of one of those tangents.
I'm going to go off on one more tangent, though.
Okay.
There's a new game that came out called the Power Washing Simulator.
Okay.
So just bear with me. This has relevance to the show.
This sounds riveting.
I mean, it's kind of relaxing, but it's also, you can play it for like 5 minutes and you're like, I'm right bored. But there's one where you go and clean a skate park, and guess what was graffitied on the wall? That S symbol.
Even know. Get out of here.
Yep, it's in the game.
The S symbol that inspired the name Generation S.
There you go. That's it.
That's amazing.
It's still in video games to this day.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere, man. And nobody knows where it came from. No. So, all right. We this is getting away from us, man. Okay. So the TV show was fantastic. We watched it. Do you have any favorite episodes? I mean, we talked about the Haunted Mask being like the first big special, but do you have any other favorite episodes that stood out for you?
A Night in Horror Tower.
Okay, so you like the cover for that one too.
I like the cover for that, and the episode was great.
Yeah, that was another one that was like a two-parter, I think, because I remember, I think it was on the VHS tape for the Haunted Mask. They had a behind-the-scenes like vignette for A Night in Terror Tower,
right.
Which I thought was kind of cool. So I do remember that one. That one was good. Again, we talked about the Cuckoo Clock of Doom, probably one of my favorites.
That was a good episode. The book not as much, but for me, but the TV show was definitely very, very good.
Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed that because it had kind of that time travel feel to it, where the kid kept getting younger. He didn't want to, obviously, but he kept going back in time and was like, what's going on? I also remember you mentioned one of your scariest books was Welcome to Camp Nightmare.
Also a great episode, another two-parter.
That was a two-parter. I was just going to say that. Yep. That was a great one. And that one was actually, I will admit, that one kind of scared me as a kid. Like I wasn't scared by most of these because I thought they were kind of hokey. That one creeped me out.
Yeah, no, that the TV scared me more than the book, I think, because I don't know, it put it into like a different light, you know.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like, maybe this is part of it as well. When you're reading a book, you're kind of setting the tone in your head. So if you don't want to read it as frighteningly, you can change things around in your mind, I guess. Whereas if it's on the screen and they use the right music and they use the right, inflections and cinematography, it's going to creep you out. You can't avoid it. It is what it is. Right. And so I felt that, and again, that was coming off the fact that like I was still scared by like the Jason Voorhees, character in Friday the 13th. So it was, to me, like any scary movie that takes place in the woods to this day will get to me to some degree. Yeah. And this was no exception, obviously. So,
and random trivia about the show, everyone's favorite Vader, Hayden Christensen, was in Night of the Living Dummy 3. Way back in the day.
Well, hey, hold on. A little extra trivia then. Not only was Hayden Christensen in it, but another famous Canadian actor was in one of the earlier episodes, and we argued about who the name of this guy was last time.
That's right.
You kept calling it Jake Gyllenhaal. I said, dude, it's not Jake Gyllenhaal. It is, in fact, Ryan Gosling.
Right. Well, they're interchangeable.
That's right. Ryan Gosling was in Say Cheese and Die.
That's right.
Another one that had a fantastic book cover was just the family grilling out barbecuing. There were just skeletons.
That was great.
Loved it. It was fantastic.
Great cover.
Anyway, fantastic show. As of this recording, August of 2022, it is still on Netflix. I highly recommend you check it
Absolutely.
out. I don't want to generalize. It's on Netflix in the U.S., and I know not every country is the same.
Sure.
So if you are listening to this out of the country, by the way, it's freaking sweet. Thank you so much.
Seriously.
But pip and all that if you're in England, right? I don't know why I did that. I'm sorry. Anyway, so great show. Check it out. It's fun. It's hokey. It'll give you a blast of nostalgia, and that's what 90s. This is all about. Absolutely. So, all right, that's the show. Let's talk about some of the other areas of Goosebumps. We're gonna go last with the movies because I've never seen the movies and you have. So we're going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about the other, toys, merchandise. There wasn't as much as some of the other franchises out there. And you had a good point about this last time we tried recording too, as to why that was. But
it's the books. The books were the collectibles.
But the books were the merchandise. Exactly.
Right, the books were the merchandise.
I mean, you look at you had Ninja Turtles, you had He-Man, you had Power Rangers, all of these TV shows that they sold a lot of toys, but that was because of the shows. Whereas Goosebumps books, I mean, unless you were just you didn't buy books and all you did was go to the library, people bought books, and that's what was making the money. And so the merchandise was definitely kind of like secondary, but don't get me wrong, there was quite a few things out there you could get that weren't a book.
And also, there weren't a lot of recurring characters in Goosebumps. The Turtles, they were the Turtles. You can make every variation of the Turtles and sell thousands of figures, but Goosebumps, you make a figure for every book, then,
you're not going to do that. But that being said, you go back to what were the characters that were featured on a lot of these different, tchotchkes or whatever. It was usually the same characters. And so Slappy the Dummy was a big one.
Yep.
I remember the hamster actually was featured a lot too. Now that I think about it, the hamster from Monster Blood 2 was there a lot.
Yep.
You had, there was a skeleton. I don't think he was actually in any of the series.
I think the skeleton was supposed to be like the dad barbecuing from
maybe
the photo one.
From Say Cheese and Die. That would make sense.
I think that's what it... Because if I remember correctly, it had a tall hat on and an apron, and I think that's what the dad was wearing in...
I think so.
Say Cheese and Die.
So that would make sense. That honestly would make sense. And again, just going back to, it would pull characters from the book covers because that was what we remember from the obviously the stories too, but the covers, just going back to that. Do you remember they had those rubber hand puppets?
Yes.
So I had a couple of those. I had the Shrunken Head from The Curse of the Shrunken Head, and then I had the Mud Monster from You Can't Scare Me, and those were so cool, right? They reminded me of those toys that came out before I was born, but Boglins, back in the 80s. There were these little rubber. I mean, I made a rubber fist joke last time we talked about the puppets, and I'm not gonna do it again.
Do that again.
It doesn't sit as well this time.
No, it doesn't.
See what I did there?
Now I do. Yeah. No, that was good.
Sorry. Okay. So we had those puppets. Those were a lot of fun.
I had a couple of puppets. I had the werewolf from Fever Swamp puppet.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I had the Haunted Mask one too. Oh, and the Curse of the Mummy. I had a mummy head.
The Mummy Head. Yep. Okay. I remember. We didn't have it. I remember that one though. I saw it in stores. They had a Goosebumps board game that
I never
remember.
Heard of.
I remember. It's funny because I remember owning it. I couldn't tell you how to play it. I remember it had to do with I forget. You were in a graveyard or something, but I remember I before this episode I went on and I googled the board game and I saw it and I said, "Yep, I remember what it looked like now." I still couldn't tell you what it was about. So they had probably several board games. That was the one I remember. And you mentioned last time too, video games that I never played.
Yeah, there were two back in the 90s, Horrorland and Attack of the Mutant, which was off the book Attack of the Mutants, where it had superheroes in it. And basically, the Attack of the Mutant, you had to go around and save all the heroes to defeat the villain. And Horrorland was almost like a choose your own adventure book in video game form. You would progress.
Because that's what the book was. It was a choose your own adventure.
Right.
It was one of the Give Yourself Goosebumps books.
Right. And so, it was basically just that in video game form, back in the 90s, so it was kind of pixelated. I remember playing Escape from Horrorland for maybe 15, 20 minutes. I found it really boring and confusing, and I never picked it up. I don't think the video games really took off like they were kind of hoping it would.
Well, it was kind of the antithesis of a book, right? I mean, if you're reading a book, that's because you're not wanting to play video games and vice versa. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I can see why they would try to do it. But, I mean, there's a reason they've really never made follow-up Goosebumps video games because, let's be honest, I mean, it probably wouldn't do. It's not the correct medium for the property. I'll in my opinion.
No, I completely agree.
So, but yeah, man, I mean, they had cool stuff. And they're even now you go to stores now, you're seeing a lot of Goosebumps stuff again, because again, 30 years later, what do we see on store shelves now? Right. It's stuff that we wanted as kids that we can now buy as grown ass adults. So there it is. So, all right. So that's the merchandise.
And the McDonald's toys. They'd had a couple of McDonald's toys too.
There was McDonald's toys. That's
McDonald's
right. And I never
back
had
in
them.
the day made toys for every popular thing in existence.
They did, yeah. Oh my God! I'm sure we'll do a whole episode on McDonald's toys one day because, I had a lot of them. I'll tell you that right now.
I think I still have a lot of them somewhere in my basement.
They're probably worth a lot of money if you find them.
Maybe, but we'll see.
All right, man. Let's go ahead and we'll talk about the movies and we'll kind of wrap things up here. So the movies, there's two of them, and I have not seen either of them. So really, what I want you to do is kind of give a brief synopsis of each, and then just kind of your overall opinion on was it good? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
So they both star Jack Black. One in 2015, one in 2018, and the first one was better than the second one. The second one kind of dropped the ball a little bit, but the first one, if you're a fan of Goosebumps, basically follows R.L. Stine, and except R.L. Stine was picked on when he was a kid, and he created the Goosebumps characters to take revenge on the people that picked on him. So he would write the stories in these books on this typewriter that was kind of possessed by a demon or something.
Yeah.
And as he created these books, the monsters would come to life in the books and would eventually go on kind of like a tear and, destroy the town and stuff like that. So the original manuscripts of all the Goosebumps books he had locked in a closet. Anyway, he has a daughter. She gets into a fight with R.L. Stine, the next door neighbor, who's kind of into her. Hears it comes over. The monsters get released.
Okay.
And it's Slappy, who ends up being released second after the Abominable Snowman is released. But what Slappy does is he takes all the books, opens all of them, releases all the monsters, and then burns the books so you could trap the monsters back in the book. And basically it's them going through and having to finish writing the story where all the monsters kind of come together and they can capture them all again. The second movie is basically the same thing, except there's a giant Tesla coil involved for some reason.
Interesting. Okay. Well, there you go. Copy and paste / Tesla coil. Exactly. That's the plot of the second one. Yeah. Okay. So it really sounds like we're not missing much if we only were to watch one, watch the first one.
Right. And Jack Black's in the second one for, 15 minutes at the end.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's barely even in it, even though he's on the cover of all the DVDs.
Oh, well, that's lame then. Yeah. Forget that,
but
man.
The first one was pretty good. Again, it's Goosebumps. It's made for kids. Take it with a grain of salt, but it wasn't bad.
So, okay, I mean, you don't have kids. You know, I could take my son to see something like that. But as an adult who read the Goosebumps books, did it take you back and make you relive some of your childhood? Or was it really too stupid to do that as far as like just the level of humor and plot?
No, because you know what? The monsters were true to, I feel, what they were.
Okay.
In the books. And I'll tell you, Slappy is diabolical.
Okay.
And
so literally your worst nightmare then.
Yeah, no, it definitely brought back some anxiety.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But I mean, all the characters kind of looked like HD versions of their book covers. So
unlike the TV show where they would get it wrong so many times, they actually went out of their way to make them look like the book covers.
Yes. To a certain degree.
See, that in and of itself, on a scale of 5 stars, that'll give it at least 3 stars for me, even if I don't like the movie, right? I mean, I would appreciate that because that's what I wanted from the shows as a kid, and I rarely got that where I felt they truly but truly portrayed what the cover was representing for those books.
Right.
So, all right. So, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle for both. What are your thoughts?
Thumbs up for the first one. The second one, kind of take it or leave it. But
take it or leave it. So borderline thumbs down, but kind of that horizontal thumb thing that people do when they're not sure of something.
You know what? If you're bored and you've watched the first one and you like it, you watch the second one. It kind of wraps up like an overall story, but kind of also not really at the same point. But if you're really bored and you want to watch a movie with the kids, it's not a bad one.
So like if I was like in October, we like to watch kids Halloween movies that aren't too scary. You think we put that on for the kids? No big deal.
Both of them. Yeah.
Both of them. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, I will definitely keep that in mind then. All right, man. Well, listen, that's Goosebumps. That is Goosebumps in a nutshell. That's our perspective of Goosebumps. Again, a franchise that for me, I mean, impacted me so much. As I mentioned at the start of this, it got me into horror in general, as far as, at least from a book perspective. I always was kind of fascinated with scary movies, but was still too scared to watch most of them. But from a book series standpoint, there was, we had these books, and then I learned afterwards about the Fear Street books that R.L. Stine wrote, and actually just learned today from you that the Fear Street books came out before Goosebumps. Yep. I did not know that. But then he also wrote The Ghosts of Fear Street. Was that after Goosebumps, and that was more to capitalize on Goosebumps?
I think that was at the same time that Goosebumps got really popular. Yeah. And he also didn't want to give up on Fear Street. So I think that's why he wrote Ghosts of Fear Street. It was kind of
because I remember Fear Street was more like the teenage audience, right? That was like the typical, 17 to 19-year-old, characters. Ghosts of Fear Street, I think, was more in line with Goosebumps, where like the kids were probably 12 or 13, right?
Right. I think he was trying to. I think Ghosts of Fear Street was an attempt to kind of bridge the gap between Goosebumps, like capture. Now Goosebumps was a couple of years older, and now he's trying to capture that kids turning into teens, so that hopefully they go back and read Fear Street.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. And I did, honestly. That was, like I said, it got me into reading scary stories, and I started looking for other authors that would write scary stories. Christopher Pike was another one that I really liked as a kid growing up. And then as an adult, love Stephen King, Dean Koontz, another fantastic author. So I still love reading horror novels today. And I gotta attribute at least part of that to Goosebumps, because yes, a lot of them were really hokey, but there were some that were genuinely creepy, and there was some imagery that when I would read the stories, I would put these images in my head, and some of them were pretty scary. So, I think it all comes, I got to attribute that to R.L. Stine and to Goosebumps in particular. It also got me into another area of my life that I've learned to love, and it is reading. We talked about how for you, it was kind of a struggle, and this really turned you on to it. I didn't struggle with reading before this, but again, as I said before, this was one of the first book series that didn't have any pictures in it that I read and couldn't put down. And so I think from there, after Goosebumps, pretty soon after that, like Harry Potter came out, so I read Harry Potter books, right. And that was is binge reading, where like I literally would read and not stop. I would read. Literally between every class, I would read as soon as I got home from school until I went to bed, and then it kept doing it. So like the fact that it was a series where you could get the next book and keep going, to me, I mean, I'm a creature of habit, right? And so when you get into a routine of doing something like that, and there's so much to go through, that was like my dream come true for reading. Like there was like it never ended. There were so many books to go through.
That's how I got into Star Wars. Goosebumps. As I got older, I found the Heir to the Empire and Dark Force Rising, and that.
So these are Star Wars novels.
They're Star Wars novels. They're not canon or anything like that. I guess they're part of the legacy or whatever. But I started reading those, and I couldn't put them down. Couldn't put them down.
So, you why don't you go ahead and tell me about this? So by the time this hits the airwaves, or whatever you call them when they're over the internet, will be the week before, or like a few days before New York City Comic Con, I believe.
Yes, and I'm actually going to go meet R.L. Stine.
That's right.
He's going to be there. I'm going to meet two of my favorite authors, R.L. Stine being one of them, and Brandon Sanderson, the gentleman I mentioned before.
That's right, yeah.
Who's got amazing book series, the Stormlight Chronicles, the Mistborn series. They're just so good, so well written. But I'm going to meet both of them.
Yep.
And I don't know what book I'm going to have Stine sign.
I was going to say, you got to bring one, even if you have to go buy it.
Oh, I'm probably going to have to go buy it. I have no idea where my Goosebumps books are.
I'm sure, yeah.
Again, they're probably in a box somewhere.
And honestly, I feel like those are like, you could go on eBay and buy a bunch, and you probably aren't breaking the bank because they made a bunch of them, so they're not super rare necessarily. Yeah, man. Well, I'd say probably the Haunted Mask. If I were to venture a guess,
it's probably going to be that one.
Or you get Night of the Living Dummy and have him write his name all over Slappy's face so that you don't have to look at it.
Or both. I might do both.
I mean, hey, man, if you can get two, get a two for there. Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, no, you'll have to definitely send me pictures. And what we'll do is we'll post it on the Facebook page, Generation S Podcast, so we can show people. And hey, by the way, guys, I forgot to mention at the start of this, and to be honest, I don't know if I've mentioned it in previous episodes, but we do have a Facebook page, Generation S Podcast. Give us a follow. The same artwork you're seeing on this podcast is the same one we use on Facebook, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Hopefully not. But we try to share out some good content there, and feel free to, if you've got your favorite Goosebumps stories, feel free to pop them on there as well. Dude, we're just over an hour now, so
nice.
Dan,
all right.
Dude, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun,
and it recorded this time, right?
You know what? I've been literally, as we've been talking through this episode, I've been checking my levels, and we're still good. So, are you recording? I'll ask you. Are you recording?
I'm recording.
You're good.
Well,
okay. Oh, thank God. Not that I didn't have fun last time. And I remember at the end of it, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And you were so positive. You're like, dude, it was just practice. We're good. Let's do this again. So thank you so much for your flexibility on that. And this was a ton of fun. I hope you'll come back for future episodes.
Anytime you have me, I'll be here.
Absolutely. Well, and so again, we're recording this in August. The plan is for this to come out the first week of October. And if we stick with our bi-weekly release schedule, that means we've got one more episode in October. So of course, with October, we're going to talk about Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
And when I say Halloween, I mean the holiday as a whole. We'll probably talk about the Halloween movies, but I'm talking traditions for Halloween, growing up, trick-or-treating, you name it. We're going to talk about that. It's going to be me, you, and I think Lou Carnivale. I think he wants to jump on too. So we'll have like a special edition, kind of a three-way. There it is. Let's just leave it at that. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a fantastic run down memory lane and a fantastic way to kick off October. So thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Goodbye.